Have you ever smelled death in a warm glass of milk? I have. That cold, bitter scent didn't hit my tongue first. This was right there, buried in my mother-in-law's eyes as she stared at my baby bump. That glass of milk almost ended everything. But instead, it cracked open the doors to a living hell, revealing the rot inside the Miller dynasty. Turns out, the most dangerous enemy isn't some stranger. They're sitting right across from you at the dinner table. This isn't just a story about a poisoning. It's about how a mother used her enemy's own weapon just to survive. And the final piece of evidence I've found will make you question everyone in your life. It all started on a miserable rainy night in Portland. The city always feels a bit gloomy, but this downpour felt personal, like it was trying to drown me in my own isolation. I'm Claire, a freelance writer, and at the time I was 5 months pregnant. Now, you'd think a woman 5 months along would be resting on a sofa, right? Not in this house. In the Miller household, the rules are simple. If you aren't bringing in a profit, you're bringing in labor. While my husband's entire family was upstairs laughing and relaxing after a lavish banquet, the only person not on the honored guest list, was alone in a silent kitchen, wrestling with a mountain of porcelain and the leftovers of their greed. The smell of garlic butter and expensive red wine still hung in the air. It made me want to throw up. I looked down at my hands. They were meant for typing, for creating dream worlds on a keyboard. Now they were red and shriveled from the freezing dishwater. Just then, I caught a glimpse of something through the fogged-up kitchen glass. A silhouette flickered at the end of the dark hallway. Ronald. He seemed to pause for a second, his eyes fixing on me. It was too fast, too blurry in the shadows to read his face, but I felt it, ... that heavy, silent presence. Then he was gone. The real nightmare began a few nights earlier. I had snuck into Ronald's old safe, and my hands were shaking as I touched something I never should have seen, an old, leather-bound diary. It was locked away like a curse. I only managed to flip through the first few pages, but my eyes locked onto these frantic, jagged scribbles. It's not mine, ... Everything will fall apart. Must punish ... Single quotes. I scrambled through a few more pages, and that's when I saw it. Older ink written a lifetime ago. That child has HIS eyes. Every time I look at him, I see the betrayal. Does Margaret really think I don't know? My heart started pounding against my ribs. At the time, I thought he was talking about some old debt or a failed business deal. God, I was so wrong. What I had stumbled upon wasn't a financial secret. It was a bleeding wound in the very heart of this family. I had accidentally opened a door to hell. I had no idea what was about to crawl out. Standing there in the darkness of the kitchen, the only light came from my phone screen. I happened to scroll past the latest post from Lindsay, my sister-in-law, the one who spends her life curated in designer clothes. It was a family portrait. Everyone was huddled around the banquet table, smiles sparkling under the crystal chandeliers. The caption was just 3 words: the complete family. I stared at that photo. Margaret, Ronald, Lindsay, Emily, even Ethan, my husband. They were all there. But me, I had been erased. Not a trace of me, not even a mention of my name. A cold, empty ache started spreading from my chest to my fingertips. This wasn't a photographer's mistake. It wasn't Lindsay being forgetful. This was a calculated deletion. A silent message. Even if I was carrying the next Miller heir, I would always be an outsider standing on the edge of their gold-plated world. I was used to those micro-stabs. The way Ronald sighed with contempt whenever I mentioned my writing. The way Margaret offered kind advice. Claire, you should really get a certification. Get a real job. Or Emily's razor-thin smile when I tried to join a dinner conversation. They didn't have to kick me out. They just had to make me feel like I didn't belong. Every look, every offhand comment was like a tiny needle, stabbing exactly where no one could see. No open wounds, just a constant throbbing bruise on my heart. I put my hand on my stomach and wondered if they don't even see me as family. What's going to happen to this baby? I carried that bruise with me every time I washed dishes alone, listening to their laughter echoing from the living room. But those invisible bruises, they were just the warm-up for the kill shot. They were preparing a blow wrapped in the sweet sugar of the one thing I thought was safe, just as my heart was hitting rock bottom. A soft but commanding footstep rang out on the marble floor. The sharp click-clack of Louboutins sounded like the ticking of a time bomb. My mother-in-law, Margaret, appeared. She didn't have her usual icy mask on. Instead, she was holding a warm glass of milk, wearing a smile so gentle it felt terrifying. Looking into her eyes, I didn't see a grandmother's love. I saw a scientist watching a specimen in a glass cage. "Drink up, dear," she said. Her voice was like dripping honey, but her eyes were pinning me down with an invisible pressure. "This is the only thing in this house you don't have to pay for, Claire. In this family, everything exists for a reason. You've worked so hard, ... The baby needs the care that perhaps his mother has forgotten." That phrase felt like a velvet slap to the face. She managed to insult my poverty and question my motherhood in a single breath. She pressed the glass into my hands. I felt the warmth spreading, the heavy scent of vanilla and honey filling the air. But as I brought it closer, something hit Mia, strange, sharp. Chemical bitterness that sliced right through my pregnancy-heightened senses. This wasn't some herbal aftertaste. It was cold, artificial, and it didn't belong in a kitchen. At that exact moment, my hand instinctively moved to my stomach. My baby kicked hard. Not the usual sweet flutters from when I read stories, but frantic, jolting shudders. A miniature earthquake inside me. My heart hammered against my ribs as my motherly instinct screamed one thing: danger. That poisoned milk wasn't just a sign of spite anymore. It was a declaration of war. I didn't know what secret I'd stumbled onto, but I knew they'd kill. "Me too, keep it buried. Come with me to the final page of that diary," where every piece of this horror show finally fits together into a picture so twisted I still can't believe it. But before we open that final page, we have to go back to that fateful rainy night. The night a glass of love became the key to hell. And I realized I was just a pawn in their deadly game. I fought to keep my hands from shaking as I looked into Margaret's calculating, narrowed eyes. I forced a smile and set the glass down on the cold stone counter. "Thanks, Margaret, but my stomach is acting up. I'll drink it as soon as I finish cleaning this mess." She didn't push. No begging, no fake sweetness. She just stood there in a suffocating silence, her eyes flickering toward the milk with a look of pure, breathless anticipation. In that dead silence, a thought turned my blood to ice. If I drink this and collapse, they'll call it a tragic accident. A frail, pregnant woman. No investigation, just a small funeral and a will executed exactly how Margaret wants. I thought about Ethan's call from earlier. His voice had been tired but warm. "I miss you and the baby. It's just a few more days, then I'm home." I had wanted to tell him about the isolation, about the weird milk, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to stress him out. "Don't worry, we're doing fine," I had lied. Now, those words tasted like poison in the back of my throat. My chest tightened. If I dropped dead right now, would he suspect anything? A second later, I had my answer, and it hurt. He would believe his mother. He always does. My instinct wasn't just whispering anymore. It was howling. "This is your final warning." She didn't leave immediately. She stood there, adjusting her pearl necklace, slowly savoring the raw fear written all over my face. 30 minutes passed in a haunting silence. The kitchen clock ticked like a hammer against my nerves. Margaret had retreated into the shadows of the hallway, but I felt her, watching, waiting. That's when my father-in-law, Ronald, burst through the door. The sound of it slammed over the noise of the rain. He walked in looking like a wounded animal after a day on the stock floor, reeking of expensive bourbon and sheer exhaustion. He barked that he was thirsty, his voice hoarse and rude, the same way he'd been barking orders at me for years. I looked at the milk sitting on the counter. A thin skin had started to form on the white surface. I hesitated for a split second. A sharp premonition electrification my spine. Logic told me to pour it out, but another part of Mitha, part broken by years of insults and isolation, just went numb. Under the pressure of his glare and his impatience, I handed it to him. Ronald didn't suspect a thing. To him, I was just a piece of furniture, a servant. He grabbed the glass and chugged the whole thing in one go. White droplets clinging to the lips of the most powerful man in the family. Less than 10 minutes later, the symphony of shadows began. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was the sound of glass hitting the marble floor and shattering into 1,000 pieces. The horror hit so fast I couldn't breathe. Ronald started convulsing violently. His face, usually flushed red from booze, turned a deathly ash gray. He hit the floor, clawing at his throat like he was trying to rip a breath out of the air. Amidst the sudden chaos, Margaret, Lindsay, and Emily stepped out of the shadows as if they had been waiting for the show to start. Not one of them rushed to help him. Instead, 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me, cold, sharp, and dripping with accusation. I realized then that I had walked right into it. A perfect trap set with kindness. A voice inside my head whispered, "In this house, you aren't innocent. Until proven guilty, you're the outsider. ... Until they need someone to sacrifice." They stood there, frozen like statues in a Greek tragedy, watching me tremble amidst the wreckage of their family. Right then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ethan, my husband, calling from a job site on the other side of the state. I thought he'd be my lifeline, but the voice on the other end was a final fatal blow. "Did you give that milk to my father?" "What the hell, Claire?" "My mom said you did something unthinkable. She said you were angry at him about money. ... There was no worry in his voice, only thick suspicion and crushing disappointment. Ethan, the man I trusted more than my own life, had swallowed his mother's story in a single breath. He used my full name, cold and distant, dropping the nickname he only used when we were alone. His voice sounded foreign, flat, like he was reading a death warrant. Everything went blurry. My ears started ringing as if I'd been shoved underwater. My hand went limp, and my phone clattered onto the cold stone floor. The screen shattered right across our wallpaper, our wedding photo. Those smiles looked like a cruel joke now. My chest tightened, a sharp pain radiating from my heart to my throat, bitter and suffocating. I clutched my stomach, where the baby had gone eerily still, and I felt something inside me break into ash, just like that screen. I could still hear Margaret's voice through the speaker on the floor, oozing a staged concern. "Ethan, don't stress. I'm right here. Claire probably just needs rest." And a psychiatrist. Her voice was like honey, but to me, it was the hiss of a snake that had successfully injected its venom into my last remaining relationship. Her fake protection was the blade that severed the final cord between me and my husband. In that moment, I realized a brutal truth. Trust was dead. And when trust dies, it doesn't go quietly. It drags the whole world down with it. I looked down at my bump. I didn't know if I could win yet. I only knew one thing. If I lost, I wouldn't be the only one paying the price. And I had no idea that. While I stood there, other decisions were already being made behind my back. I was completely on my own in this war, standing there under those accusing glares in that chaotic living room. My mind flashed back to the years spent with the Millers. It wasn't a life. It was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Every day was a fresh paper cut to my dignity. They didn't scream slurs. They used politeness to murder my soul. My writing, the only thing that made me feel alive, was mocked by Margaret and Lindsay as fancy unemployment. In their world, if you aren't a number on a balance sheet, your words are just trash. I still remember the afternoon I spent 8 hours in the kitchen, baking a lemon tart for the family anniversary. I've poured my heart into it, hoping a little sweetness could melt the ice between us. But all night, that tart sat untouched on an expensive porcelain plate, lonely and ignored. They'd rather eat store-bought, mass-produced sweets than taste anything from my hands. At the end of the night, when everyone had drifted away, I watched from a dark corner as my heart broke. Margaret casually used a silver server to slide the entire perfect tart into the trash. She wiped her hands on a silk napkin and whispered to Lindsay with pure disgust. "The sweets of the poor always taste cheap, Lindsay. Never let your palate be tainted by things lacking class." I was the parasite, the stain on their perfect family. Only Ethan was my life jacket. In those rare moments, it was just us. He'd hug me from behind while I did the dishes and whisper, "Mom and the girls just don't know any better. Don't let it get to you, baby." Then he'd put his hand on my belly and tell the baby, "Daddy's here. I promise I'm going to give you and your mom a real home." Those promises, as fragile as they were the only things keeping me there. I believed him. I believed our love was strong enough to outrun their prejudice. God, I was so naive. In this house, his love for me always took a back seat to his fear of his mother. The breaking point was the night I was framed for stealing a huge sum of money from Ronald's safe, a baseless lie that no one, not even Ethan, defended me against. That night, going down for water, I overheard Margaret and Lindsay whispering behind the library door. Margaret's voice was ice. "Tomorrow, it's over. We're cutting this cancer out of the Miller family for good." Terrified for myself and especially for my unborn child, I realized I couldn't be a lamb led to slaughter anymore. "I'm not writing stories anymore," I told myself in the dark. "I'm writing a journal. And sometimes a journal is the only thing that keeps you from disappearing before the enemy can finish you off." This morning, I found that the photos of the weird residue in the milk had vanished from my phone. Even the cloud storage was empty. Margaret wasn't just trying to poison me. She was erasing the truth. In this house, justice could be deleted with a single click, but losing the evidence wasn't the scariest part. What turned my blood to ice was the realization someone had touched my phone, and they knew much more than I thought. I didn't know it then, but the moment I started documenting everything was the exact moment they started watching me even closer. I opened my laptop, not to write my next novel. I created a new file titled "Notes from the Inside in Case I Don't Make It." My hands were shaking so bad I had to retype the same sentence twice. It felt like if I messed up even one character, everything would just ... vanish. Each word I typed felt like a cold blade carving into stone. Tonight. Overheard Margaret and Lindsay planning something. Details fuzzy, but the target is clear. Me and the baby. I wasn't writing to tell a story. I was writing to stay alive. To make sure that if I disappeared one day, something of me would remain a piece of evidence proving I was here, and that I saw the darkness they tried so hard to bury. It's the only shield a mother has when she's backed into a corner with zero allies. Suddenly, a faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. I slammed my laptop shut, heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. A shadow stopped right outside my door. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Then the footsteps faded away. But the heavy, expensive scent of Margaret's perfume lingered. In the air, she had been standing right there. I was inches away from being caught red-handed. I paused before the final note, a question I was too terrified to answer. If the worst happens, will Ethan stand by my grave to cry, or will he stand by his mother to sign the inheritance papers? I used to think I was the prey in this house, but as the first frames of footage flickered onto my screen, I realized the truth. I was the one holding the noose that could choke the entire Miller dynasty. And that noose wasn't just around Margaret's neck. My plan almost went up in flames on the very first night. I was trying to hide a tiny camera inside the base of a reading lamp in the library when I heard footsteps. Without thinking, I dove under the desk, holding my breath. The door creaked open, and those familiar Louboutin heels stopped right in front of my face. I could literally smell her perfume. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would echo through the entire room. She stood there for a full minute that felt like a century before, letting out a soft sigh and walking away. It took me 10 minutes to stop shaking enough to crawl out. My stomach turned, and the baby kicked frantically like a warning siren. That's when I learned the first rule of this war. One slip up and it's game over. And the price, lives. Of me and my child, I used the tiny scraps of money I'd saved from my freelance gigs to secretly buy these tiny hidden cameras. I tucked them into every blind spot: the library, the kitchen, the hallways. They were just basic consumer gadgets, the kind you buy to watch your pets. I waited for the moments when the house was empty or when they were distracted by their loud, flashy parties. I'd plant one at a time, hidden in plain sight. A fake flower arrangement, an old desk clock, even the dust jacket of a book. Their total arrogance and disdain for my ordinary life were my perfect cover. They never looked twice at the things I brought home. I had no idea then that those tiny steel eyes would record a conversation I was never supposed to hear. Conversation that made all my worst fears look naive. It was a desperate act of self-defense. But those cameras caught more than just Margaret handing a suspicious file to Lindsay. They caught a dark truth that would flip the script on everyone's life. The first clips popped up on my laptop at 2 a.m. While the whole Miller mansion was drowning in a fake staged silence. I held my breath, watching the footage that no wife or daughter-in-law should ever have to see. The camera hidden in the living room showed me Margaret, the woman who prides herself on being high class, frantically digging through my purse and my manuscripts. She flipped through my pages with pure disgust, but her hands were trembling with a rage she couldn't suppress. She wasn't looking for money. She was looking for a weapon to get rid of me then. The footage from the kitchen started. The audio from the tiny mic made my blood run cold. I caught the tail end of a conversation between Margaret and Lindsay when they thought I was asleep. Margaret leaned against the marble counter, her face twisting into something sick and obsessive under the dim lights. Ever since she showed up, Ethan isn't mine anymore. Doesn't listen to me. He's starting to have his own thoughts. It's all because of that woman. She paused, her eyes glazing over like someone who'd lost their mind, then hissed through. Her teeth, that baby. It cannot be born into this family. It's a stain. It's a chain that will tie Ethan to that mediocre life forever. I won't let it happen. She didn't sound like a grandmother talking about her grandkid. She sounded like a dictator planning to wipe out a rebellion. Lindsay just stood there. No protest. Just a silent nada complicity that chilled me to the bone. But the secrets didn't stop with Margaret. The hallway camera caught another side of this perfect family. Ronald, the dignified patriarch, was constantly sneaking out to the balcony or into the library for late-night calls. He spoke in hushed tones, his face tight with anxiety, constantly looking over his shoulder. From the fragmented bits I heard, I realized he was covering up a massive financial black hole or some illegal back-halley deal. And then there was the clip from Ronald's office. He was quietly comparing an old photo of Ethan to a yellowed, faded picture in his wallet. His face crumpled in bitterness before he furiously crushed the mystery photo and tossed it in the trash. I looped that clip over and over, trying to read his lips. I couldn't make out the words, but I saw his lips, trembling in a silent, raw hatred. At the time, I thought it was just the coldness he'd always shown his son. Now I know it was pure loathing. Turns out, underneath the gold-plated exterior of the complete family was a nest of vipers. Margaret would commit a crime just to keep her son under her thumb. And Ronald was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy and disgrace. I realized I hadn't just married Ethan. I had walked into a lion's den, where my life and my baby's life were were just pawns in their sick, twisted game. When Ethan finally got home, the Miller mansion didn't feel like an emergency room anymore. It felt like a high-stakes courtroom, and I was already on death row. Standing in that living room, surrounded by the ice-cold stares of his mother and sisters, Ethan looked so small, so unfamiliar. I didn't even recognize the man I loved. Under the crushing weight of Margaret's lies about me, poisoning his. Father, he looked at Minot with a protective gaze, but with a mix of pity and suspicion. Claire, his voice was shaking, but every word felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of my last hope. My mother has never lied to me. She lived her whole life for this family. But you. Maybe your solitary writing life has made you confuse reality with fiction. You're imagining conspiracies that just don't exist. That was exactly what they wanted me to think. I'd read about this in psychology articles. It's a twisted form of manipulation where the victim starts questioning their own sanity. They call it gaslighting now. I was living it. Margaret was a grandmaster at this game. She used Ethan's love for her as a weapon, turning me from a victim into a criminal in the eyes of my own husband. When your partner looks at you like a stranger, that's when the crack in your soul starts to split wide open. He took a step toward me, reaching for my shoulder, but I flinched. It felt like an electric shock. "I'm doing this to protect you from my father's rage when he wakes up," he said. "Everyone is on edge. You should leave for a few days. Let things cool down." Mom showed me the vial Lindsay found under your pillow. "Claire, why would you do this?" "I want to believe you, but the evidence doesn't lie." I went numb. It felt like a massive block of ice just shattered in my chest. Betrayal from an enemy is one thing, but betrayal from the person who's supposed to have your back? That's what actually kills you. I walked back to our room like a ghost. Our sanctuary now reeked of rejection. Before packing, I put my hand on my stomach where my little one was trembling along with my ragged breaths. I whispered, hot tears stinging my eyes. "Sweetie, I'm so sorry. I have nothing for you right now but a broken heart. But I promise, you and my life, you will grow up in a world that knows how to love you right. A world without these sugar-coated lies." As I walked out the door with one small suitcase, the baby kicked hard, frantic, like it was trying to break through a shell to protect me. Ethan chased me out to the porch under the pouring rain. He held out a thick envelope, his hand shaking under the dim yellow light. "Take this, Claire. For a hotel. For the baby, ... I looked at that envelope, then into his weak, hollow eyes. I just shook my head, a bitter smile cutting through the rain on my face. "Keep the cash, Ethan. Save it for your mother's next set of lies. You're going to need it to buy back whatever's left of your conscience." I turned back one last time and slid off my wedding ring. The metal that used to mean forever was now just a shackle. I left it on the cold stone table, right? Next to the dried up milk glass, a silent witness to their crime. I walked straight into the freezing Portland night without looking back. Behind me, Ethan stood frozen in that hollow kitchen. No more screaming, no more accusations. It's just the roar of the rain outside and a haunting silence within. He stared at that ring sitting alone next to the milky residue. The kitchen light hit the gold, making it flicker one last time like a final goodbye. Then he collapsed into a chair, his head in the same hands that promised to protect me, now only capable of holding his own cowardice. Later. In a tiny apartment on the edge of the city, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the smell of old paint, I refused to break. The Portland storm was still raging, but inside me a cold fire had started to burn. I wasn't the weak daughter-in-law bowing my head in the Miller kitchen anymore. Now I was a mother guarding her child and a writer holding the manuscript of a real-life vendetta. First thing I did was open my old laptop. My fingers were shaking, but my mind was set. I backed up every single frame from those hidden cameras to the cloud and sent a copy straight to my lawyer with one command. If anything happens to me or the baby, leak this to every major headline. I knew the Millers' only true God was their reputation, and I was going to use that to make them pay. The next morning, I went to a private lab. As the nurse drew my blood, I watched the red liquid fill the vial and thought about that white milk. The results were exactly what I feared, a massive dose of heavy sedatives. This wasn't a mistake. It was a lethal amount, enough to put a pregnant woman into a deep coma or worse, cause a tragedy for the baby. Holding that report, a chill ran down my spine. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to erase our existence entirely. That night, I sat in the dark, the glow from my phone reflecting in my eyes. I drafted an anonymous email to Ethan. No long explanations. No begging for him to believe me because I knew my words meant nothing against his mother's truth. I simply attached one short video clip. It was a crystal clear shot from the kitchen corner. Lindsay, looking as calm as if she were handing over a birthday gift, sliding a small, unlabeled glass vial to Margaret. Margaret took it, and they shared. A look of pure, disgusting complicity before she started stirring the poison into my milk. I hit send. The click of the keyboard echoed in the empty room like a starter pistol for a psychological massacre. I leaned back, hand on my bump, and whispered, "Time for the truth to speak, baby." I knew the second Ethan hit play, the perfect world his mother built would start rotting from the roots up. But I also had to ask myself, was the naked truth enough to shatter 30 years of blind worship? Or would it just turn Ethan into a desperate enemy and put me in more danger than ever before? I hit send with a heart full of hope and pure terror. Because in this game, the line between salvation and total destruction is razor-thin. The second that email notification pinged on Ethan's phone, his world started to end. I could picture him sitting alone in that cold construction trailer, clicking the attachment and watching the mask of the woman he worshipped fall away. Every frame of Lindsay handing over that vial, every complicit smirk from Margaret played out in high definition, obliterating every lie she had fed him since he was a child. Less than 2 hours later, Ethan was at my door. He didn't even knock. He just collapsed onto the floor the second I opened it. The man who was supposed to be the pillar of my life was a shell of himself, his shoulders shaking with the kind of trauma you don't recover from quickly. He grabbed me, holding me so tight I thought he was afraid the baby and I would evaporate into the Portland night. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I'm 1,000 times sorry," he sobbed, his voice raw with regret. "I was so stupid. I let them brainwash me. I abandoned you when you needed me most." I stayed silent, letting him cry on my shoulder. Forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, but the truth was finally in the room. We sat together at my laptop, rewatching the footage from the hidden cameras. Every clip of Margaret digging through my things, every hushed call from Ronald. It was a horror movie about betrayal. But then we got to the final file. It was from a camera I'd hidden in the deepest shadow of the hallway, leading to the master suite, a clip I hadn't even seen yet because I'd been in such a rush to escape. We both stopped breathing. "I thought I knew the worst of it," I whispered, clutching the hem of Ethan's shirt, till I opened the one video I hadn't watched yet. The camera captured the aftermath after Ronald collapsed and after I had fled. It showed a perspective no one in the Miller family expected. In the frame, Margaret wasn't panicked like she had been for the doctors. She stood there right next to her husband as he convulsed on the floor. She didn't call 911, not at first. She slowly reached down, picked up the vial Lindsay had given her earlier, wiped it clean with a handkerchief, and calmly slipped it into her silk pocket. Then she turned back and stood over Ronald as he gasped for life. No tears, no regret. Instead, a cold, satisfied smile slowly spread across her lips, the smile of an artist who just finished a masterpiece. She pulled out a floral silk cloth and meticulously wiped a single drop of spilled milk off the stone counter. The movement was so calm, so unhurried, it was bone-chilling. was like she was erasing the final trace of a perfect plan. This wasn't just a plan to get rid of me. This was a much bigger, more sadistic play, and we were only just scratching the surface. But the next part was what broke Ethan completely. The camera picked up audio from an argument between Margaret and Ronald from a few hours earlier that I had missed. Margaret's voice wasn't gentle anymore. It was like a serrated blade. "I know everything about her, Ronald. Don't think I don't know you've been sneaking her money and promising a future for that baby. Well, ... Things are going back to the way they should be. That girl won't be here anymore. She'll be the one who poisoned you, and you will only have me left." It hit us like a freight train. Margaret hadn't acted on impulse. She knew everything. Her plot was a double-edged sword, a calculation so ruthless it was almost demonic. She didn't just want me out of the picture, she wanted to own Ronald completely. In the video, after he falls, I saw her move closer. She didn't call for help. She casually used her foot to nudge her husband's convulsing body to the side so he wouldn't stain the rug. Then she calmly pulled out her phone and waited. She waited exactly 5 minutes, long enough to ensure the poison had decimated his nervous system before she started her staged, hysterical screaming for help. She knew the dose wouldn't kill him instantly, but it would destroy his motor functions forever. And she was right. Ronald would spend the rest of his life with tremors, seizures, and a voice that couldn't form a single clear word. The most powerful man in the Miller dynasty was now just a hollow shell, entirely dependent on the woman he once feared. I looked into Ethan's eyes and saw pure, unadulterated disgust. We realized then that Margaret Miller loved no one. She loved control. And to get it, she was willing to turn her husband into an invalid and her daughter-in-law into a murderer, with all the evidence in hand, from the cold medical labs to the slow-motion footage of her crimes, Ethan. And I went back to the Miller mansion. This time I didn't walk in as an outcast. I walked in as the person who held the fate of the entire family in my hands. The confrontation happened in the same grand living room where Ronald sat in a wheelchair, his eyes glazed over, his hands shaking uncontrollably. When Ethan hit play on the laptop in the middle of the dining table, the air in the room turned. To lead, the sound of Margaret's satisfied laugh echoed through the house like a funeral bell for her fake dignity. Lindsay stood there like a statue, all the blood drained from her face, while Emily dropped her teacup, the porcelain shattering on the floor. The truth was so raw, so undeniable, that no lie could cover it up anymore. Ethan looked at his mother, a woman he used to worship, with a gaze full of loathing and agony. He didn't scream, but his voice was heavy enough to crush the room. "You aren't my mother anymore. You're a monster." I stepped toward Margaret. She was trying to shrink into her expensive armchair, but she just looked pathetic and small. "Clean?" Ina whispered in her ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You weren't afraid of me, Margaret. You were afraid of being alone. You were willing to break your husband just so he could never leave you. Well, look at you now. You have your absolute control over a husband who can't speak and a son who will never look at you again. Congratulations on your empty kingdom." Faced with the total collapse of the empire she had built on lies, Margaret didn't beg. She didn't explain. She just sat there, frozen like a cracked stone statue. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw her eyes. No control. No arrogance. Just a terrifying, hollow emptiness, the black void of a woman who traded every ounce of love for power, only to end up with nothing but the hatred of her own son. DGIK Lot. BNDCH, VBNA, Hoei Fan K, KNTCA, Cao Cheyenne Sang Ting, ANA, TGP Dong Nguyen, TIC, Shuhari G Bin Fan Ne, THNHMT. Say KTBNG Ench Epic Finale, Ki MCHT Drama Mi Y. TP Trung VOS, GXNITMV, Twist Kin Gu, Yoon Gu Height, Thung. "Let's go, Claire," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave firmer than I'd ever heard it. He gripped my hand, pulling me through the toxic cloud that had settled over the room. Right then and there, Ethan declared he was done. He renounced his inheritance, his name, and every single string that tied him to the Miller bloodline. We walked out of those heavy iron gates without looking back, not even a glance at the hollow shell of Margaret watching from the window. Took a deep, lung-filling breath of the post-rain air, feeling the warmth of Ethan's hand and the gentle flutter of the life inside me. We left that poison house forever, leaving behind the dark secrets of a dynasty rotting from within. We weren't just leaving with our freedom. We were walking toward the first day of our real lives. But I was dead wrong to think it ended there. A year later, an anonymous package would arrive, a package that would flip everything I thought I knew upside down and force me to make the hardest choice of my life. Protect my family's peace or burn it all down with the truth. 1 year later, Portland was still weeping with rain, but now, the sound wasn't a soundtrack for loneliness. It was the background music for my success. I was standing in the middle of a massive downtown bookstore, the warm glow of the lights hitting the life-sized standee of my new psychological thriller, The Quiet Mother. The signing was packed. As I looked at the line of readers, every autograph I signed felt like a middle finger to the past. Those fancy unemployment words they mocked, they were now the very bricks I used to build my own kingdom. Suddenly, the room seemed to skip a beat. My eyes locked onto a figure standing at the very back of the line. It was Margaret. I barely recognized the woman who used to rule the Miller Empire. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 12 months. That haughty queen bee posture was gone, replaced by a frail, skeletal frame. Her designer coat looked 3 sizes too big for her. Those hands, the ones that had so ruthlessly wiped away the poisoned milk, were trembling as she clutched my book. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was a ghost of the past, swallowed by her own schemes, left alone to nurse a paralyzed husband and endure the total silence of her only son. When it was finally her turn, the air between us turned to ice. Margaret couldn't even look me in the eye. She slowly opened the front cover, her gaze freezing on the dedication I'd written after so many sleepless nights. To those who thought silence was weakness, those words were a final sentence, sharp and undeniable. I looked at her, then slowly placed my hand on my stomach where a C-section scar now sat. A permanent medal of the life that fought through death. That scar wasn't a wound anymore. It was a trophy. I didn't insult her. I didn't scream. I just gave her a tiny, formal nod, the kind of cold, polite nod you give a total stranger passing by on the street. It was the nod of total liberation. She had zero power to hurt me, and I had zero energy left to even hate her. I turned away, erasing her existence from my mind to give a bright, genuine smile to the next reader in line. Margaret stood there, stranded in the crowd, hugging my book to her chest like she was clinging to a late-stage regret she'd have to carry to her grave. A few months later, the package arrived. No return address. Inside was Ronald's old diary. The final page was written in a shaky, desperate hand. Claire, I knew about the milk. I heard her plan. I didn't stop it. Maybe this is how a coward like me pays for a lifetime of treating Ethan like garbage. And you, in my will, I've set up a trust for hope. But if the truth about Margaret ever comes out, the feds will freeze that money because of the criminal case. Don't tell Ethan. Let him think I was just a victim. The choice is yours. My fingers tightened around the paper, but that letter was just the tip of the iceberg. The final pages of that diary, the ones that had terrified me that rainy night, they were the real bomb. Ronald had written them in a state of pure panic, with undeniable proof. Ethan was not his son. He was the result of Margaret's secret affair. It's that phrase I'd glimpsed. The child is not mine. It finally made sense. Ronald was planning to confront her, and that was the real reason for the poisoned milk. Margaret saw the perfect opening. Use me as the fall guy to silence the husband who was about to expose her, while wiping out the outsider who had touched her secret. The entire Miller fortune would stay hers, and our biological son would be none the wiser. The truth made me sick. My entire war, Ronald's paralyzed life. It was all just collateral damage in a game to protect a lie about bloodlines. I hesitated for a long time before reading the last sentence, because some truths, once you know them, you can never go back to being innocent. I thought I knew the rot in this family, but these final pages, written by a man terrified of his own shadow, revealed a crime that was truly unforgivable. Sunlight filtered through my glass of water, casting shimmering patterns over the pages, trembling in my hands. From the backyard, I heard the laughter of hope and Ethan the sound of a peace I had literally died and come back to life for. I have everything now: freedom, a family, a career. But in my hands, I hold the one thing that could destroy it all. Ronald chose a coward's silence. Now I'm standing at the same crossroads. Do I bury the final piece of the truth to protect my daughter's future and my husband's heart? Or do I bring it into the light and risk losing everything for the sake of justice? I looked out at the garden, watching Ethan lift hope into the air, pointing at the sapling we'd planted together. I named that tree Truth. And I still don't know if that tree or my family needs to be watered with every truth, or just enough of the truth to help us grow strong. But every night, as I watch Ethan holding hope fast asleep, I can't help but wonder if he knew the truth about his own blood. Would he still look at me with that same love? Or would he resent me for keeping him in the dark? This choice isn't just about justice anymore. It's about protecting the most fragile things we have. Claire's journey is, in many ways, it's the journey of so many of us fighting to be heard, fighting to protect what we love in a world built on prejudice. Through all of this, I've learned one thing: never doubt that tiny voice inside you. It might just be the scream of your survival instinct, trying to shield you from the dangers your eyes aren't ready to see yet. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that every voice deserves to be heard, then join me on this journey. Hit subscribe so you don't miss more stories about recovery, courage, and the silent strength of women. Every single sub is a powerful reminder that stories like this need to be told. My story ends here. But my question for you is just beginning. If you were Claire, what would you choose? Keep the silence to protect your family, or speak the truth, even if it means losing everything? Let me know by commenting silence or truth below. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next chapter of our journey.